The new house. The Thompsons were thrilled to move into their new home, an old Victorian house that stood grandly at the end of a winding road, shrouded by thick woods and separated from the nearest neighbor by over a mile. The house, with its sprawling porches, arching windows, and creaking wooden floors, felt like a place of forgotten charm, a piece of history waiting to be rediscovered. The family had barely settled in when they started noticing peculiar things. With every sunset, an unnatural silence would fall over the house. No breeze, no rustling trees, just a deafening stillness. It was on their first night that young Emily, unable to sleep, noticed the change. She whispered to her older brother Sam, who shrugged it off, but the unease lingered as they drifted into an uneasy slumber. Mark and Sarah, the parents, exchanged glances as they, too, sensed something off, yet kept quiet, not wanting to frighten the children. They convinced themselves it was just their imaginations, but each felt an unspoken dread creeping in. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the shadows cast on the wall by her nightlight. She had always loved making shadow puppets, creating stories with her hands and fingers against the light. But as her eyes grew heavy, a new shadow appeared, a tall, slouched figure with gangly limbs and hollow, empty eyes. Emily felt her breath catch as the shadow seemed to lean closer, stretching over her like an inescapable presence. Frozen in fear, she tried to scream but no sound came out. When she finally managed to let out a cry, her parents rushed in, switching on the lights. Emily was trembling, her face pale, but there was no one there. Just a nightmare, sweetheart, her mother cooed, but as Sarah held Emily close, she felt an icy chill in the room. As she left, she glanced over her shoulder, but the shadow was gone, leaving only an unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach. On the second night, the air felt different, thick and heavy, as if the house itself were watching. As they gathered in the living room, strange whispers began drifting through the air, low and indistinct. The voices sounded like a chorus of muted, sinister conversations, fading in and out from different corners of the house. Sam swore he heard his name being called, a soft whisper echoing from upstairs. Mark, trying to keep calm, picked up a flashlight and ventured into the hallway, the beam cutting through the dense shadows. The whispers grew louder as he neared a large mirror hanging on the wall, and just as he aimed the light at it, a dark shape darted across its surface, leaving a faint smudge like a handprint. His heart raced as he backed away, but he forced himself to keep quiet. Mark told himself it was a trick of the light, even as his mind screamed that something else was at play. By the third night, the entire family was on edge, exhaustion and fear taking their toll. Just as they tried to get some rest, they were jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. The pacing started slowly, deliberate and heavy, echoing down the hallway outside their bedrooms. The noise grew louder, like a march, each step growing closer. Mark rose, swallowing his fear, and stepped into the hallway, but the footsteps stopped abruptly. Silence filled the air, heavy and cold. As he stood there, he could hear breathing, slow and labored, close enough to touch. He turned, his heart pounding, but there was no one there. Returning to bed, he whispered to Sarah, "I think we're not alone." Desperate to find an explanation, Mark set up cameras around the property, hoping to catch whatever was terrorizing his family. Reviewing the footage the next day, they finally saw it, a creature crawling through the yard, its form blurry, like a living shadow with eyes that glowed faintly. It prowled around the house, tapping on windows and sniffing the air as if searching for something, or someone. It lingered by Emily's window, its face pressing against the glass, its eyes watching, waiting. Then, as if sensing it was being watched, it turned abruptly and vanished into the darkness. The family stared at the screen in horror, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. For the first time, they realized they were dealing with something beyond their understanding. That night, Emily woke with a start, her bed sheets twisted and soaked in sweat. She had dreamt of the creature clawing its way through her window, its fingers long and sharp, leaving scratches across the glass. But as she sat up, trying to shake off the nightmare, she noticed the marks were real. Scratches marred the window, deep and fresh, as if something had tried to break in. Emily screamed, and the family rushed in. Mark ran his hand along the glass, feeling the rough edges of the scratches. They all stared, paralyzed by the thought that whatever haunted them had nearly entered their daughter's room. On the seventh night, as the family gathered in one room, they heard it, a soft, haunting lullaby that floated through the air, as if sung by a voice from another world. It was faint at first, a lilting tune that grew louder, filling the house. They recognized it as an old melody that Sarah's grandmother used to sing, a song she hadn't heard since childhood. The tune seemed to come from the basement, drawing them closer, like a siren's call. Gathering their courage, they descended the stairs, only to find the basement dark and empty. But the song lingered in the air, and as they searched the walls, they found faint claw marks, etched deeply into the concrete as though something had been trying to dig its way out. Unable to take the terror any longer, they searched every corner of the house for answers. In the attic, behind a loose floorboard, they discovered a hidden compartment containing a faded letter. It was a warning from the previous owner, who had experienced the same horrors. The letter described a curse, explaining that the creature was bound to the property and would visit each night, invisible yet casting a shadow. Each night, it grew closer to its victims, feeding on their fear. The family was frozen, realizing that their time was running out, and soon, the creature would come for them. With no other options, the Thompsons decided to make a stand. Mark sprinkled salt at every entrance and lit candles around the house, hoping to ward off the creature. They clutched each other tightly, bracing for the oncoming terror. Midnight struck, and the creature's scratching, pacing, and whispering grew relentless. Its shadow appeared, cast against the walls, growing larger, inching toward them. They could feel its breath, hot and rancid, as it closed in, but the candles flickered and held strong, casting it back, though it fought to push forward, a sinister form crawling over the furniture and walls. Just when all hope seemed lost, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The creature's shadow began to fade, retreating with a hiss as the morning light filled the room. A deep growl echoed one last time, as if promising to return. They knew they couldn't stay another night. As the family stumbled out of the house, they looked back, feeling as if a pair of eyes watched from the darkened windows. They left with a single thought: they had survived, but the creature would always be waiting, lurking in the shadows, until another family dared to enter. As the Thompsons prepare to leave, Emily suddenly freezes, her eyes locked on something in the distance. Her voice is barely a whisper as she mutters, "It's not over, it won't let us go." They all turn to see what she's looking at, a twisted, shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the woods, watching them. Its hollow eyes reflect an unnatural red, glowing with a malevolent intent. The creature raises a bony, clawed hand, pointing directly at the family. The air around them grows cold, and the faint echo of a voice drifts toward them, saying, "You belong to me." As they drive away, Sarah feels a sharp, burning sensation on her wrist. Looking down, she sees an ominous, dark mark slowly spreading across her skin, like a bruise in the shape of a clawed hand. One by one, each family member feels the same burning on their bodies. It's as if the creature has branded them, marking them as its own. Mark tries to reassure everyone, but the children are panicked, and Sarah's hand begins to tremble. They realize, horrified, that they're bound to the creature by more than just fear. They're now physically marked by it, a claim that can't be undone. That night, as they stay at a nearby hotel, each family member experiences vivid nightmares, visions of the creature standing over them, whispering in a language they cannot understand. Emily dreams of the creature reaching out, holding her down, its cold fingers sinking into her skin as it mutters, "I am always with you." In the morning, the Thompsons share their dreams and discover they all experienced the same nightmare. Leaving them shaken, they are forced to admit the truth: the creature isn't tied to the house, it's tied to them. A few nights later, Emily begins to act strangely. She no longer sleeps, and her eyes have a hollow, vacant look. She mumbles to herself, muttering phrases that sound like the creature's whispers. As days pass, Emily's condition worsens. She starts speaking in the creature's voice, issuing cryptic warnings and laughing in a way that chills her family to the bone. One night, she looks at her family with eyes that aren't her own and whispers, "I've found you." Desperate, the family visits a priest, Father Gabriel, who agrees to help. Sensing the severity of their plight, he warns them that entities like the creature are ancient and have a way of binding themselves to souls, feeding on fear until they possess the body and mind completely. As he prays over Emily, she convulses violently, her body arching and her skin paling to an unnatural shade. Father Gabriel continues his prayers. But the creature's shadow appears in the room, looming over them. Snarling, the priest feels an unseen force choking him, forcing him to stop. "You can't break these chains," the creature hisses through Emily. Realizing there is no escape, the family makes a final attempt to sever their bond with the creature. They gather at the house once more, attempting to face their fears, believing that confronting the entity may free them. They circle together, lighting candles and reciting prayers, hoping to weaken its hold. But instead, they begin to see shadows multiplying, surrounding them, whispering their names in eerie, distorted voices. Each member of the family is taken back to their darkest memories, forced to relive the most terrifying moments of their lives as the creature laughs, savoring their fear. Finally, the creature reveals its true face, skeletal, with hollow eyes that seem to pull them into an abyss. It reaches out, wrapping each family member in darkness, and they feel themselves slipping away, losing their grip on reality. They realize too late that the creature was never after the house. It wanted them all along. Each member of the family, gripped by terror, fades into the shadow, becoming part of the creature's eternal collection. The last sound they hear is the faint whisper of the creature's voice, saying, "Welcome home." The family regains consciousness in a place that seems familiar but wrong. It appears to be their home, yet everything is cast in shadows, and the air is thick with a sense of dread. They try to move, but the floors feel sticky, as if they're wading through a swamp of shadows. Mark whispers, "Is this some kind of twisted version of our house?" As they navigate this shadowy labyrinth, the walls seem to pulsate, exuding an almost organic quality. The hallway stretches impossibly long, and with each step, faint whispers echo around them. The voices are those of their past selves, replaying moments of joy, sorrow, and terror, now tainted with a sinister undertone. They come across a room filled with mirrors, each reflecting a different aspect of their lives, but the images are distorted, and behind each reflection stands a shadowy figure. Sarah steps closer, mesmerized by her own reflection. Suddenly, her mirror self breaks into a twisted smile, whispering, "You can't escape us." Before Sarah can pull away, her hand is pulled into the mirror, the cold, sticky grip of her own reflection latching onto her. Mark rushes to pull her back, and together, they stumble out of the room, feeling more deeply ensnared in the creature's grasp. Days seem to pass in this dark realm, and the family starts noticing changes in each other. Emily, once vibrant, now has hollow, dark eyes, and her voice has a lifeless quality. Mark begins to develop strange bruises that pulse with a sickly red hue, as if his skin is rejecting the light. They start whispering to each other, debating if they should confront the creature, but every time they say its name, they feel a searing pain where their dark marks are. It's as though the creature is tightening its grip with each attempt to defy it. As they journey further, they hear voices of other trapped souls, cries and whispers for help. Sarah tries to comfort a voice that sounds like a little girl, calling her own mother's name, but when Sarah reaches out, she feels only ice-cold fingers wrap around her hand, pulling her toward a dark void. The girl's voice grows distorted and sinister, and Sarah realizes that it was the creature's lure, a trap set to drain her spirit. She yanks her hand back, terrified, feeling that the creature's power is growing with each moment they remain in its domain. The family stumbles upon a hidden room filled with countless bookshelves, each shelf lined with dusty, leather-bound books. As they open one, they find lists of names, dates, and symbols they can't decipher. Mark notices his own name listed on one page, with today's date next to it. Beneath his name is an inscription, claimed for the shadow. They realize this is the creature's ledger, a record of souls it has captured. The more they search, the more they understand. Every name in these books belongs to a lost soul now trapped within the creature's world. Emily begins hearing voices, fragments of conversations from the creature itself. She realizes it's whispering its plans to her, and she hears it say, "The mark has been placed, they belong to me forever." The realization hits her hard. This isn't a mere haunting. The creature has marked them as part of its own existence, and it's slowly consuming their identities, turning them into parts of itself. The family looks at Emily, horrified by her pallor and the vacant expression in her eyes, as if the creature is already drawing her away from them. Desperate, they find what appears to be a stairway leading down, far below the shadowy realm. As they descend, the walls close in, and the air grows dense and suffocating. The stairway opens into a cavernous chamber lined with rows of iron cages, each holding shadows that writhe and scream silently. Mark whispers, "Are these the others?" Sarah nods, horrified. They see familiar faces, as if some are fragments of the people they once knew, now just twisted remnants within the creature's prison. Driven to the edge of despair, Mark attempts to bargain with the creature, pleading for the safety of his family. The creature finally appears, looming above them in the form of a massive shadow with hollow, burning eyes. "What could you possibly offer me?" it hisses. Mark, trembling, offers himself, his own soul, in exchange for his family's freedom. The creature laughs, a terrible sound that reverberates through the chamber, and it whispers, "One soul is never enough, but perhaps I can be persuaded." The creature challenges them to a test. If they can make it to the door at the other end of the chamber, it will release them, but as they begin to cross, shadowy forms rise from the ground, taking the shape of their worst fears. Emily sees visions of being pulled into endless darkness. Sarah faces the ghostly apparition of her own past mistakes, and Mark is haunted by visions of his own failings as a father and husband. Each step forward drains them, forcing them to confront the darkest parts of themselves, as the creature revels in their torment. As the family struggles through the chamber, their bodies feel heavy, as if the shadows themselves are pulling them down. The creature's whispers echo in their minds, feeding off their fear and doubt. Mark's vision blurs, and he stumbles, nearly collapsing. Sarah pulls him up, but he can barely stand. "I don't think I can make it," he mutters, feeling his energy draining. Emily, gripping his hand, murmurs, "We're in this together, Dad, we'll all make it out, or none of us will." The creature chuckles in the shadows, relishing their despair. "Courage," it sneers, "is such a fleeting thing." They soon find themselves in another chamber, colder and darker than the rest. Rows of spectral figures surround them, shadowy forms of the creature's past victims. These figures are barely more than silhouettes with hollow, haunting eyes. One reaches out to Sarah, whispering in a rasping voice, "They took us one by one, and now you are among us." Mark shudders, realizing that these lost souls are the creature's trophies, fragments of people who had entered its realm but never left. Sarah begins to back away, but Emily steps forward, recognizing a familiar face among the shadows. "Is that Mom?" she whispers. A chill runs down Mark's spine. His wife had disappeared years ago, without a trace, but now, here she was, or some twisted, spectral version of her. Torn between escaping and saving his wife, Mark makes a desperate offer. "Let my family go, I'll stay with you, I'll join them." The creature laughs, a hollow, mirthless sound that vibrates through the walls. "You misunderstand, Mark," it hisses. "I don't want your body or your families, I want something far deeper." It then offers them a twisted deal. If they wish to leave, one of them must willingly sacrifice their memories. The creature will erase all knowledge of their existence, even from the memories of each other. They would be like ghosts among the living, remembered by no one. The family is shattered by this revelation. Emily begins to cry, not wanting to lose the memories of her family, but Mark, seeing no other choice, steps forward. "Erase me, let them go," he says, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah clutches his arm, pleading, "Don't do this, Mark, there has to be another way." But before the creature can accept Mark's offer, a voice, faint but determined, echoes from behind them. It's the spirit of Mark's wife. "You don't belong here," she whispers, her voice filled with a strength that defies the shadows. "Find the light, and don't let it go." Suddenly, the family realizes the truth. The creature has no power over those who resist it. Its control is rooted in fear and despair, summoning the memory of their love for each other. They draw closer, joining hands and focusing on the warmth of their bond. The creature hisses, its form flickering, the shadowy walls starting to crumble. "No, you can't escape me," it shrieks. Mark and Sarah feel a warmth spreading through them as they focus on every good memory they've shared, laughter, love, and resilience. Emily closes her eyes, summoning an inner light that seems to drive back the darkness. The walls begin to crack, revealing faint glimmers of daylight beyond. But before the creature can accept Mark's offer, a voice, faint but determined, echoes from behind them. it's the spirit of Mark's wife. You don't belong here, she whispers, her voice filled with a strength that defies the shadows. Find the light, and don't let it go. Suddenly, the family realizes the truth: the creature has no power over those who resist it. Its control is rooted in fear and despair. Summoning the memory of their love for each other, they draw closer, joining hands and focusing on the warmth of their bond. The creature hisses, its form flickering, the shadowy walls starting to crumble. No, you can't escape me, it shrieks. Mark and Sarah feel a warmth spreading through them as they focus on every good memory they've shared: laughter, love, and resilience. Emily closes her eyes, summoning an inner light that seems to drive back the darkness. The walls begin to crack, revealing faint glimmers of daylight beyond. As the light grows stronger, the shadowy figures wail, retreating into the cracks of the walls. The creature lashes out, clawing at the family, trying to pull them back into the darkness, but with each memory they conjure, its grasp weakens. Finally, in a blinding flash, the walls collapse, leaving the family standing in the early morning light just beyond the threshold of the house. They gasp, feeling the grass beneath their feet, the coolness of the dawn. For a moment, they're overwhelmed with disbelief, uncertain if they've truly escaped. The creature's final, despairing wail echoes behind them as the house collapses in on itself, sinking into the earth, leaving only a desolate, empty lot in its place. As the family walks away, they make a silent vow and never to speak of the ordeal. But just as they reach the edge of the woods, Emily feels a strange chill run down her spine. She turns to see a faint shadow lingering where the house once stood, watching them, waiting. Is it gone? Emily whispers, clinging to her father's arm. Mark squeezes her hand, but he doesn't have an answer. He merely stares at the ground, the weight of their experience heavy on his shoulders. Some things, he mutters, never truly leave. The family moves forward, their shadows stretching long behind them as the first light of day breaks over the horizon, and from the empty lot, a faint whisper echoes, a promise that the creature will return, waiting for the next unwitting soul to step into the shadows. The mirror arrives. The day it arrived, Sophie felt a strange chill in the air. It was an old mirror, encased in a tarnished silver frame adorned with intricate, almost hypnotic carvings. She found it at a small, dusty antique shop hidden away in a forgotten alley. Something about it had called to her, a pull she couldn't explain. An old family heirloom, the shopkeeper had said, his voice tinged with caution. They say it reveals what lies beneath, what's hidden from the world. Use it wisely. Sophie had laughed it off as superstitious nonsense. Eager to bring the mysterious find home, she set it up in her bedroom, positioning it so that it would catch the morning light. As night fell, the mirror reflected only darkness, a deep, endless void that seemed to breathe. That night, Sophie woke up abruptly, her heart racing. She looked at the mirror, which glowed faintly in the darkness. Moving toward it, she noticed her own reflection, but something was wrong. Her eyes in the mirror seemed distant, unfocused, almost as if she were staring at something just beyond the glass. As she reached out to touch it, her hand brushed the cold surface, and a chill shot up her spine. Her reflection suddenly changed, her face distorted, mouth stretching into an unnatural grin. As her eyes grew darker, hollow, she stumbled back in horror, but the grin remained in the glass, lingering even as she ran from the room. The next night, Sophie avoided the mirror, choosing to stay in her living room, but as midnight approached, whispers filled the air, faint and distorted, like voices trapped underwater. They grew louder, overlapping, as if pleading with her. Unable to resist, she returned to the mirror. The whispers stopped the moment she looked into it. Her reflection stood still, but behind it was a shadow, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching her with piercing, crimson eyes. Paralyzed by fear, she whispered, "Who are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it reached a hand toward her through the glass. A feeling of dread filled her as she watched her own hand rise involuntarily, mirroring the figure's movement. She broke free from the trance, stumbling back and locking herself in her bathroom, trembling in silence until dawn. Over the next few days, Sophie noticed that the mirror seemed to be showing her flashes of memories, not her own, but of people she had never met, moments from lives that had long since faded. She saw visions of tragedy, a woman crying by the bedside of a dying child, a man weeping beside a grave, and people standing in a dim room, bound by some dark force. The worst vision came one evening when she saw herself, an older version, worn, her face haunted. In the mirror, her future self whispered, "You should have destroyed it, it won't let you go." Sleep became elusive, nightmares mingling with reality. She dreamed of the mirror, the figure behind the glass inching closer each night, its smile stretching impossibly wide. In one dream, it stepped through the mirror, its fingers brushing her face, leaving an icy burn on her skin. When she awoke, her skin bore red marks, identical to those from her dream. As she touched them, they stung, a cold burn that pulsed with the memory of the figure's touch. Terrified, she tried covering the mirror, but no matter how she blocked it, her reflection continued to appear, distorted, smiling that same sinister grin. Desperate for answers, Sophie returned to the shop. The store was empty, abandoned, dust covering every surface as if no one had entered for years. A strange sense of hopelessness washed over her as she realized there was no help coming. She was alone with this cursed mirror. Returning home, she found that the mirror had changed locations, now resting at the foot of her bed. Her heart dropped, and a sudden surge of anger filled her. She decided to break it, grabbing a hammer and swinging it with all her strength, but the glass didn't shatter. Instead, it absorbed the impact, and for a fleeting moment, she saw dozens of faces screaming silently from within. One night, as the shadows lengthened, Sophie noticed a series of faint markings etched along the frame of the mirror. She deciphered them, revealing a tale of a craftsman who had created the mirror centuries ago, a man who had dealt in dark arts, sealing souls within his creations. Each reflection was a life trapped, each image a person doomed to spend eternity within the glass. The faces she had seen were not just echoes, they were trapped souls, condemned to be reflections for all time. Her fate, she realized, was to become one of them unless she could break the mirror's curse. Determined to escape her fate, Sophie devised a plan. She would confront the figure in the mirror, demand her freedom. As midnight approached, she stood in front of the mirror, staring into the endless darkness within. The entity appeared, emerging slowly, its face identical to hers but twisted. With a cruel smile, "Release me," she shouted, but it only laughed, the sound hollow and devoid of warmth. "Your place is here now," it whispered. Reaching through the glass, she felt a pull, as if her very soul was being drawn into the mirror. The room blurred, her body feeling lighter, almost incorporeal. With all her strength, she turned away, pulling herself back. Realizing she couldn't break the mirror, Sophie decided to seal it away. She buried it deep in the forest, covering it with rocks, hoping the earth would contain its power. She returned home, exhausted but relieved, her mind finally at peace. But her victory was short-lived. That night, she awoke to find the mirror leaning against her bedroom wall, dust-covered but intact. Its presence was suffocating. She heard her own voice echo from within, calling her name, urging her to come closer. Her reflection in the mirror had changed. It was her, but older, a spectral version of herself, pleading for release. Resigned to her fate, Sophie approached the mirror one last time. Knowing that her struggle was over, she touched the glass, and as she did, she felt herself being pulled in, her reflection consuming her, drawing her into the darkness. Her last thought as she was engulfed was a fleeting image of her reflection, smiling that same unnatural grin. Trapped within the glass, she had become the latest addition to the cursed mirror, her soul bound to it for eternity, destined to haunt the next unfortunate soul who dared to look too closely. A few weeks later, a man discovered the mirror, lying on the forest floor. It was beautiful, almost calling to him. Entranced, he took it home, admiring his reflection, unaware of the faint whisper that began to echo through the glass. The man, Ethan, placed the mirror in his study, enthralled by its old-world beauty. The intricate carvings along the silver frame held his gaze, each detail so lifelike, almost as if the figures within were moving. He marveled at how the mirror seemed untouched by time, its glass as clear as water, but beneath the surface, a subtle darkness pulsed. On the second night, Ethan noticed something peculiar. As he read in his study, he caught a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. Looking up, he saw only his own reflection, a perfect replica, or so he thought. When he turned away, he caught the reflection moving, just slightly slower than he did. Startled, he inspected the mirror chalking it up to fatigue. But the subtle differences grew more pronounced. His reflection's eyes appeared darker, emptier, like hollow wells hiding secrets best left undisturbed. As the nights passed, it began to move independently, first mirroring his movements with a slight delay, then not at all. One night, his reflection stared back with a grim, almost knowing smile, a smile he hadn't worn in years. As days turned into weeks, Ethan felt his sanity begin to unravel. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, whispers circled him at night, calling him, begging him to return to the mirror. The once warm light of his study grew colder each night, flickering erratically when he approached the mirror. He could feel it watching him, waiting. Compelled by a strange force, Ethan found himself returning to the mirror, drawn in by its inexplicable allure. One evening, he placed his hand on the glass, feeling a sharp chill radiate through him, piercing him to the core. Suddenly, his own reflection twisted, mouth opening in a silent scream, eyes filling with a darkness that reached beyond any nightmare he could fathom. He stumbled back, horrified, but it was too late. The mirror had him. Its darkness had seeped into his mind, whispering fragments of old memories, chilling him with secrets from lives he had never lived. He realized, in horror, that he could feel her, Sophie, her desperate, pleading thoughts tangled within the glass, her soul bound to it. Determined to break the curse, Ethan reached out to antique dealers, researchers, anyone who might know how to free him. Each person he contacted fell silent soon after, phone numbers disconnected, emails returned undelivered. The whispers grew louder, filling his every thought, drowning out his sense of reality. In a final, desperate attempt, Ethan confronted the mirror once more. He gazed deeply into it, his own hollow reflection staring back, an empty shell. He spoke into the glass, demanding his freedom, pleading with Sophie, with the countless souls trapped within. "You'll join us, Ethan," his reflection whispered, its voice layered with hundreds of others, voices young and old, menacing and pitiful. "This is your eternity." Summoning his last reserve of courage, he screamed and struck the mirror with a heavy iron candlestick. But instead of shattering, the mirror laughed, a deep, guttural sound, as though it relished his suffering. He dropped the candlestick, watching as his reflection stepped forward, moving beyond the glass, stepping into his world. Ethan's vision darkened, his body feeling light, as if his soul were being drained into the mirror, leaving him only with darkness. The mirror now stood silent in the empty room, waiting patiently for its next owner, but if one listened closely, whispers would fill the air, voices pleading for release, and deep within the glass, Ethan's reflection smiled, a knowing, hollow smile, welcoming anyone who dared to gaze too deeply. The mirror had fed once more, and it would continue to feed, an insatiable hunger for souls, bound by the curse, an endless cycle of terror and despair. Sometime later, an unwitting collector found the mirror in an abandoned shop, just as Sophie and Ethan had. He picked it up, admiring its unusual craftsmanship and the faces seemingly etched within, faint shadows frozen in expressions of fear. He felt a strange pull and couldn't resist taking it home, unaware of the dark fate awaiting him. The mirror's curse lived on, weaving an eternal tapestry of horror, binding those who dared to look within its depths, one by one. The antique dealer, Jack Morrow, a man with a discerning eye for rare finds, brought the mirror into his dimly lit home. The pull he'd felt in the shop, the strange allure, had stayed with him the whole way back, filling his mind with unsettling whispers. He set it carefully on the wall of his private study, still marveling at the intricate detailing, almost hypnotic in its craftsmanship. In the low light, the mirror's silvery frame appeared to ripple, the etchings morphing into faces with pained expressions. Jack thought he saw his reflection move out of sync as he turned to leave, but he shook it off, blaming it on the long day. But that night, as Jack lay in bed, he felt a cold dread creep over him. A strange, faint voice seemed to emanate from his study, calling his name, softly at first, then with an eerie insistence. He crept down the hall, his heart pounding as he felt compelled to face the mirror, despite every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The whispers grew louder as Jack stood before the mirror, unable to look away. His reflection was somehow wrong. It wore his face but not his expression. It smirked, a twisted, malevolent grin that Jack knew he hadn't made. His stomach churned, his sense of self wavering as if the mirror were draining him. Shadows danced within the glass, dark figures twisting, writhing, clawing at the edges of the reflection. And then, as he reached out to touch the glass, his hand passed through, plunging into a void so cold it burned. Desperation filled him, but something held him there, his fingers frozen against an unyielding, invisible barrier. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of tortured voices. "Help us, join us, we need you." Each voice was distinct, layering one upon the other until they sounded like a river of souls, all drowning in an endless abyss. Jack's face twisted in fear as his reflection mouthed the words he was hearing, the dark truth dawning on him. The mirror was a prison for souls, and it had chosen him next. Hours passed, though Jack barely felt them. He could no longer tell where his body ended and the mirror's dark energy began. The shadows within seemed alive, swirling around his reflection. His own image grew more transparent, fading as if he were slowly being erased. As his consciousness ebbed, he could feel other presences within the glass, trapped in an endless limbo. Desperation gave way to horror as he recognized some of the faces, a flash of realization hitting him. Among the twisted reflections, he saw a woman's face, Sophie, her eyes wide with an eternal plea. And beside her, Ethan, his expression frozen in terror, his mouth silently screaming. They were all still there, trapped within the mirror's grasp, doomed to watch as new victims joined them one by one. Just as Jack's soul began to sink fully into the mirror's depths, a single glimmer of hope broke through, an ancient inscription near the edge of the frame that had gone unnoticed. Focusing his last ounce of willpower, he read it aloud, each word breaking through the air like a forceful, desperate chant. He clung to the words, barely audible over the mirror's dreadful whispers. "With courage unseen and strength unbound, break free from the dark ground." The shadows recoiled, hissing, their dark tendrils weakening their grip on him. The faces in the mirror twisted in anguish, their whispers turning to shrieks, an agonizing farewell from those who had lost their battle with the mirror. Jack's fingers began to feel solid again, pulling him back to his world, and with a final surge of energy, he wrenched himself free, stumbling back onto the floor of his study. But as he looked up, he realized the mirror was no longer ordinary. It pulsed, alive, its surface rippling as shadows clawed at the glass from the inside, Sophie's face reappearing one last time, her mouth moving in silent warning. Though he'd escaped, Jack was forever marked. Wherever he looked, he could see faint reflections of those trapped souls in other mirrors, their tormented faces flashing in bathroom mirrors, shop windows, even the polished glass of his own car. They were calling to him, reaching out, leaving him with no place to hide. When he finally returned to the antique shop, he saw a new face looking back at him from the mirror, his own image, twisted and dark, beckoning others to step closer, to look just a little too deeply into the mirror's cursed surface. Jack could feel it now, a faint pulse tying him to the mirror, a pull that would draw him back, again and again. The mirror had claimed another, and with Jack's unbreakable bond, it would wait, ready for the next soul drawn in by its dark allure.